Despite the unfavorable external situation, illegitimate restrictions and direct blackmail by some Western countries, Russia and China managed to ensure record-high growth rates of mutual trade. As a result of this year, Russia has become one of the leaders in oil exports to China.
Well, to talk more about today's meeting, our Chief Foreign Affairs Editor, Rob Parsons, joins me in the studio. Good to have you, Rob. What will it look like, then, this military coordination between China and Russia?
Well, we don't have any details from the meeting today, video conference meeting between the two leaders. But, the military cooperation between China and Russia has been developing for quite a long time without actually erupting into something really enormous. And although Vladimir Putin would like the cooperation to develop into something much bigger than it currently is, it seems unlikely that it's going to happen. Yes, we will see joint exercises between the Russian armed forces and the Chinese armed forces, just like we saw earlier this month in the East China Sea between the two navies. But is that going to translate into something much bigger? Probably not, I think. In the past, the Chinese took a lot of weaponry from the Russians, but gradually they've developed their own weaponry production, and so they're not as dependent as they used to be. The Chinese have also been called upon by the Russians to supply weapons to Russia for the fighting in Ukraine. So far, they've held back from doing so, and it's highly unlikely, I would say, that they're going to allow themselves to be sucked into the conflict in such a way as to supply weaponry. So, although there's a lot of wishful thinking on the part of the Russians, and although the Chinese and the Russians refer to this relationship as being strategically important, the Chinese have other things to think about as well. You mentioned, for instance, that there's a certain amount of caution on the part of the Chinese. They're describing the way they regard the war in Ukraine as being objective and fair. That's the way they want it to continue to be, because for them, ultimately, despite the fact that trade between the two countries has been growing, trade with the United States is 4 times the size of trade with Russia. Trade with the European Union, similar. So the Chinese know where their bread is buttered, basically.
I mean, you touched on it a few times there. Of course, a backdrop which today's video conference is up against is the Russia's invasion in Ukraine. Where are we with that as far as, on the ground goes?
Well, the big focus is on 2 places, and both of them in the Donbass and eastern Ukraine, which Russia needs to take if it's able to claim victory. First of all, around the town of Bakhmut, where the Russians have been battering away for 8 months now without making very much progress, but at enormous loss. And then to the north of Bakhmut, around the towns of Svatove and Krymina, where the Ukrainians are picking up momentum in their counter-offensive again. Very close to taking both cities, if they manage to do so. And the Ukrainian leadership is urging caution at the moment. That could really turn the tide on the battlefield.
All right, Rob, thanks very much for keeping us up to date.